For 37 years, I lived in Bulgaria, so the way hospitals work there never felt unusual to me. It was simply how things were. Only later, after being patient in the United States, did I realize that what I had accepted as normal was actually a very specific kind of system. In many government hospitals in Bulgaria, the atmosphere follows an unwritten hierarchy. The lower the rank of the employee, the louder the voice tends to be. So the people who often behave the harshest are the sanitarians. They carry an authority that is difficult to challenge, as if the entire building ultimately answers to them. I did not question this for years. When my first son was born in 2000, a nurse simply came into the room the next day, picked up the baby, and left with him. She also took some diapers. There was no explanation, just a quiet disappearance. The next morning, I stood in the hallway. Finally, a pediatric doctor walked by. I almost cried when I stopped her and asked about my baby. She looked annoyed.
Information is given at noon next to the baby department.
It was 8 in the morning, which meant 3 more hours of not knowing and imagining every possible thing that might be wrong. And this was not considered unusual. Years passed, life continued, countries changed. I moved to the United States and built a life there. Then in 2019, a suspicious mass had already been seen in my lungs, almost 5 centimeters. I decided not to deal with it. The body had other plans. Soon the headaches began, the kind that feel as if someone is slowly tearing your scalp open from the inside. Along with them came changes in my vision. At some point, resistance stopped being an option. I went to the emergency room. The scan showed another mass, this time in my brain. Surgery was necessary. The doctors wanted to admit me immediately, but I refused. Instead, I boarded the first flight to Bulgaria. My father knew a highly respected neurosurgeon, a professor who managed to squeeze me into his schedule. Within a day, I was admitted and scheduled for surgery the following morning. Before the operation, I had to pass through a series of medical offices for final evaluations. My husband held me the entire time as we moved from door to door. I doubt I could have managed the maze alone. The tumor had already significantly affected my physical balance. At one of the offices, after handing in my papers, the nurse left the door open. I didn't want to pressure or to disturb, so I leaned against the opposite wall in the hallway, keeping my eyes just enough to be able to see if they would call me for some questions. She looked at me and said sharply,
Standing across from the door won't make it happen faster.
By evening, I was exhausted. That was when the sanitarian arrived to shave my head. While she worked, she kept making irritated remarks about how I was holding my head.
Not like that, girl. You're making it difficult for me.
After a while, I asked her to watch her tone. Everyone here was dealing with fear and uncertainty. She looked deeply offended. I was terrified of the surgery, in a quiet, sinking way. The kind where you want to close your eyes and simply not be there anymore. Not die, just skip the part where it happens. I slept, and I didn't. And then morning came anyway. A sanitarian arrived to take me to the operating room. I was trembling. My body already knew something my mind was still trying to negotiate with. I asked her for a hug. She reacted as if I had asked for something unthinkable.
No hugs. Get yourself together. You might raise your blood pressure and they'll cancel the surgery.
We walked, not into the sterile white I had imagined, but into a space that felt closer to concrete than to care. The color was gray in a way that absorbs hope. It was heavy. She told me to remove my hospital gown. I did. Now I was completely naked. She pointed to a narrow stainless steel table. I climbed onto it. It was cold, a kind of cold that makes your body aware of itself in the most vulnerable way possible. I lay there, exposed, for what felt like a very long minute, while she searched for a blanket. When she finally covered me, she just left. I was alone, scared, and in disbelief. One by one, people started entering the room. They spoke to each other, they moved with purpose. No one spoke to me. I existed in the room, but not in their awareness. At one point, a man in a white coat entered in a fast, tense way, carrying a briefcase. He began explaining to another person beside him.
Let's get going. They want a central line too. There will be a lot of blood here.
And there I was, lying on a narrow metal table, listening, understanding enough, and realizing that in that moment, I was not a person in the room. I was a procedure. Months later, in USA, a biopsy. It took place in a CT scan room. There was the doctor and the nurses. There were 4 of them there from the start. I was positioned on my side on the scan table. One of the nurses stood next to me and held both of my hands in hers. Not symbolically, she held them. When it was time for a scan, they all had to leave the room. For those few moments, I was alone. But the moment the scan was done, they came back, and she came back to my hands. Every single time. The gesture was simple, repeated, consistent, and it was the most beautiful thing. Another surgery followed in the United States, a hysterectomy. In theory, it doesn't matter which surgery it was, because what stayed with me had nothing to do with the procedure itself. That morning, when I was admitted, a nurse met me and immediately noticed how tense I was. She didn't ignore it. She kept encouraging me, explaining gently how soon this would all be behind me, how experienced the doctor was. Her hand rested on my shoulder, moving softly with such warmth that it didn't feel like a technique. It felt human. I was placed in a bed in a room, and under the sheets there was a heating hose. For someone who is always cold, it felt like a small miracle. A quiet kind of care that doesn't announce itself but stays with you. Before the surgery, the surgeon and the anesthesiologist came to introduce themselves. When it was time, they didn't walk me to the operating room. They moved me there in my bed. As we left, they signaled to my husband. It was time for a pause, for a kiss, a moment that belonged to us before everything else took over. Then the doors opened. The room was wide, full of people. They asked me to move onto the operating table. It was covered with something soft, almost like a thin, warm layer, not cold, not hostile, just prepared for a human body. I noticed the leg restraints padded with plush. The staff spoke to me as they moved around, apologizing that there were so many of them, explaining that everyone had a specific role. I told them I didn't mind and that I actually felt privileged. And I joked that the only thing missing was a cocktail. The anesthesiologist smiled. He said the cocktail was ready and would be served any moment. There was lightness in a room where something serious was about to happen. There was care that didn't feel like a protocol, but like presence. For a long time, I thought the difference between these two places was about medicine, equipment, money, but it wasn't. In both countries, there were capable doctors, skilled hands, decisions that saved lives. The difference, in one place, I learned how to be a patient. In the other, I was allowed to remain a person. In Bulgaria, I learned to wait and not ask too much, to stand in hallways and measure time in fear, to lie still and disappear into the procedure. In the United States, nothing about the medical reality was softer, but everything about the human experience was. Someone noticed when I was tense. Someone explained. Someone warmed the bed before I lay in it. Someone held my hands. Someone made space for a goodbye. Someone made a joke when I needed to breathe. The procedures were serious in both places, but only in one of them did I feel not as a case or a task, but as someone who was there and mattered.